please.
Your attorney waited to the last minute to get coffee.
We've got to abbreviate this, and you can say it when I scroll. I mean,
And whose copy did I inherit? Yours, John?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. The next item is the sign code. Jay Sweet will start the presentation as to the changes that are being proposed by staff.
good morning.
Morning.
I wanted to do this a little bit different, give you a brief overview, then we'll go through the ordinance line by line, just so that everyone's aware of what's been going on.
Okay, I think because this is it's lengthy, but I think we might want to hold our comments until you're totally finished so that we get the whole story.
Okay.
And-
And actually, that's the reason I want to tell you sort of the story first,
Yes.
so that as we go through the comments, if you have questions, you'll understand why certain elements are being changed, and there may be another element, 10 pages later, it's being changed.
Okay.
Just to give a background, the city council directed the staff to address uses along New 41 many months ago, and as part of that, look at the sign code. The city council adopted the use changes for the New 41 corridor, and at that time, staff had realized the best approach to the sign ordinance would be to do a citywide sign ordinance, because the sign ordinance was complicated at best of how it was applied. We had the old 41 area, we had the Bonita Beach Road area, we would have had the new 41 area, and then we would have had every place else. And so as part of that, we decided, what makes more sense? We require developers to have a unified sign plan. Let's have a unified sign plan. So the only area that will be different is the old 41 corridor will be different. And then every place else in the city would have this ordinance as proposed, is our proposal. We've talked with sign companies. We've had several meetings with 4 different sign companies. Actually, we've talked to 6 different sign companies, but 4 of them have been very nice and offered to come in and talk with us. And we've had 1 2-hour meeting, 1 4-hour meeting with them to discuss proposals, what they thought was good, what they thought was bad. And we have incorporated some of those comments into the ordinance. Some of them we have not, and we will go through that. We have had, council directed us, and we have had a forum with the chamber. We've made 2 presentations, one to the chamber, the regular meeting, and then we had a special forum where they invited, and we took a lot of public input. That being said, the summary of the changes that we're making is there's some changes in definition, there's some changes in the prohibited signs, there's some changes in nonconformity, there's some changes in a lot of different areas. But the overall theme of what we're trying to do, if you look at it, is twofold. One, if you look at signs in other areas, and if you look at signs along 41, you'll see that they're sort of disconnected. And our theory is that we should create signs that are placemakers. That a sign that is 24 foot tall, 12 foot wide, and it has 40 different businesses listed on it as you're going 45 miles an hour, number one, it doesn't do anything that really helps the businesses. And the other thing that it doesn't do is bring an aesthetic to the city. The things that it does do is create safety problems as people all of a sudden decide to hit the brakes and do 25 miles an hour when everyone else is doing 65 because they're trying to read the sign. And so how do we address all these concerns that we have? Our thought process is that create placemaking signs. Limit the number of signs along the roadway, limit the height and the size. One of the things that we cannot do and will not do is regulate content. So if I can't regulate content, how do I get it to be a placemaking sign? How do I get it not just to be a smaller, with even smaller letters causing more of a problem? That's an issue that there's no easy answer. But by limiting the size, the shape, and the location of the sign, I'm greatly encouraging people to create a placemaking sign. And by doing that, what happens is it may be known as the Public Shopping Center, it may be known as the Steinmart Shopping Center, or it may be known as the Prado. But it would become a placemaking sign. Now, as part of that process, and realizing that we're limiting some height, we're limiting some square footage, what makes sense to help attract the businesses? And our thought process is, as you pull into a center, and the regulations we have, and I'm going to take the Prado as an example, as I pull off the road and pull in there, I can't read half the signs on the building. So I don't know where I'm going. I know I'm where I want to be, but I don't know where I'm going. And one of the things that we have within this code proposed is a 50% increase in the size of the sign allowed on the building. Okay? And so if you think about that, if it becomes a placemaking sign, and so I know I'm going to the Prado Shopping Center, and the sign says Prado, I know I'm where I want to be, and if when I pull in, all of a sudden I can see the signs on the building, and they make sense, is that not a better approach? One of the other things that we've added to this is the opportunity for a menu board sign or a directional sign, like to refer to as a waymaking sign, within the shopping center. So in a large shopping center, if you pull in at the south end of the Prado, you're not going to see where the stores are on the north end. But if there's a wayfinding sign that says, oh, Dixie Liquidators is down at the other end, then you know to go down and see Dixie Liquidators. The same is if you come at the north end, or where the chamber is, and you come down and you say, you know what, I think there's a Buffalo something in here. Oh, yeah, there's a sign here that says Buffalo Wings is down at the end. And so you know that you're in the right shopping center, even though you probably couldn't see that sign because of the distance of it. So our concept here is to create a holistic approach to signage, to get rid of that visual pollution. I like to call it visual noise. If you have so much information coming at you as you're driving down the road, you don't have anything. The other thing is, if you have so many signs, then they lose their impact. You just, you turn a blind eye as it is to them because you don't have that. If you have fewer signs, they become noticeable, recognizable. And so that is the approach to it. As part of that approach, we get into the most controversial issue probably, which is color. And one of the comments that we had received as we started this ordinance, reviewing it, they didn't want the colors to be too bright, too garish, and so how do you approach that? And the original proposal was to do something like in Old 41, where basically it's bronze and it's earth tones and it's very muted. And we went down that road, and we talked to the sign people and talked to some stakeholders, and they realized that they educated us, if you will, and said, look, here's the issues we have with that. And what we came away with all of that is that, you know what, the background of the sign is probably where you don't want that real intense color. But having it in the lettering, having it in the logo, those are appropriate. And so we have language in there that, in here that we'll go through, that address that. But typically, online you can get a color calculator. And we wanted to make this something that was easy to understand. And so you can pick a primary color, and the colors here, even though it's the same presentation, are different than the one that's given at the chamber, because depending upon the projector, you're going to get a little bit different colors. But if you have a primary blue, and you say, look, you can only have that as one of your colors on the sign, it can't be a background. But if you have a 15-degree change in the hue value, those are 15 degrees up, 15 degrees below. And so it becomes a little more muted, but we're not discounting color altogether. The same way with the green. The same way with the oranges. You can get more of a burnt orange or more of a faded orange. The red, that red should be a more really bright red. Again, we're not getting the color from the computer, but you can see that there's you can go to a maroon color. You can go to a lighter color, and those are all within the possibilities. And I think at this point, it's probably best to go straight through the ordinance, answer any questions you have for clarity, and then go through the ordinance page by page, and we can hit the highlights. So I guess first thing is, we have any questions so far?
Any questions?
I have one. On the part where you said, like, if I'm in a shopping center and I come in and you're proposing to allow a 50% increase in signage area.
On the building, correct.
Yeah, my question would be is if I have out parcels, which happen, and I'm on the, for example, let's say this development was on Bonita Beach Road.
Okay.
So I've got out parcels that are on Bonita Beach. That 50% increase would not apply to any buildings on the street side facade, correct?
Yes and no.
Yes.
I always get the yes and no answers. As far as the amount of signage that could be on the building, depending upon the shopping center, how the approval was, and I'm glad you asked the question, because it brings something that we have in the code that we now highlighted in the sign ordinance. Within the land development code, we have a provision for a unified sign plan in a shopping center, so that when they come in, we look at how signage is going to be done throughout the shopping center, so that when somebody comes in, we know that it's within the bounds of what the shopping center asked for and has been approved. What had happened in the past, and no need to point fingers, but
Yeah.
you know, but when Lee County was doing things, they sort of ignored that portion of it, and signs were getting permitted a little bit differently. And what we've done to ensure that doesn't happen again is include that language into the sign ordinance, so it's clear that there is a unified sign plan. So to answer your question, when a shopping center comes in, we would address that at the DO phase. At the same time, we address the architecture. It makes most sense to address signage and architecture and a new development at the same time, so that you're putting an appropriate location for your signage on the building without adversely affecting the architecture and the flavor of the development that you're trying to create. So did I answer that, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
My only concern is if, I think inside the shopping center, even if it's on the parking lot side of a out parcel, a bigger sign is appropriate because it makes, but I don't think we should be bumping up the size of the signs on the facade side that would face a main road like Bonita Beach Road or whatever, because I think, so that's comment number one. Comment number two, now, apparently the colors on these are not the same as there, because the one that's here is a different shade. That real bright light purple on that right side there is not the same color as on the
Yeah, you're,
Yeah, printed copy.
what's printed out is
closer.
yeah, really is representative of what
Only
the shades are.
of all the ones you got, the only one that, to me, that I think could be a bit garish or very, and to me, is the yellow one.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty bright. And the other comment I would make is, it's not only what this, I'm assuming like I could have this color here on one store followed by a purple on another one? Or is there something that says no? How does that part work?
There's two things about that. Number one, I just want to make sure that we're all looking at the same thing.
Right.
The big block would be the primary color, which would be limited to, on a monument sign, one primary color.
Right.
And so that if you wanted to go not off the primary color, you'd have to go those shades, that variant difference,
Yeah,
so that
right.
we're all clear. Okay. As far as on the building, we're not proposing to limit the number of primary colors on the building. So, to answer your question, yes, you could have a guy with a yellow sign next to a store with a purple sign. Our bigger concern with that, which we don't even get into, but we do cover it in Chapter 3 on new development, is the color of the building, more so than the signage itself.
So as I understand it, the prohibition on the primary colors and the secondary colors only relate to monument signs.
Correct.
Not to other types of
Right.
signs that you're gonna have. They're like
Okay.
building signs. And on the monument signs, you can still have, say, lettering,
Yeah.
or let's say the golden arches, because we had somebody come in from McDonald's, so I'll use golden arch. You could still have the golden arches, which is a yellow, on that sign that's not on the building. A building is fine, so we're not worried there.
Right.
On their smaller signs, they could have that on their monument sign, but they would not be allowed to have, say, red in the background, which would be their normal color with the yellow and the red.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to make, and that is that the background color becomes the issue for some of them. On the other hand, if we look at even the screen there, if that's the primary yellow, and if you look at a 15-degree variation, that's still within the range of what someone would call gold. And so I don't think that we're hurting anybody specifically that way. I think that there's enough room in there. You know, whether or not you're going to get brilliant red or maroon, whether or not you're going to get sunshine yellow versus, golden yellow is the change. But the idea is more than anything is the background, because that becomes very harsh. And it also becomes very distracting as you have more and more signs, all with these different backgrounds going down there.
Did I see somewhere in here that it said you wouldn't change logos,
We don't change, and we made a provision in here,
official logos?
official, that as long as they are a trademarked or state, I don't want somebody just coming and say, oh, my logo. So
Right.
that if they've gone through the effort to actually make it a real trademarked logo, that should be respected. On the monument signs, they can have whatever the color logo is, as long as it doesn't exceed 20% of the sign area,
Ah, okay.
okay? So, even that, if you think about it, and I'm going to be a little absurd, but if you were to have a sandblasted sign that says McDonald's, if they want to take 20% of it and have their full color logo in the corner, they could do that. And we felt that was appropriate, because people do spend a lot of advertising to advertise their brand. But on the other hand, I think there should be the possibility for community standards and aesthetics that the community would like to adhere to.
Didn't they make Best Buy up in Estero, Coconut Point? Didn't they make them change the colors of their logo on their building?
I can show you examples all across the state and the country where McDonald's has a white sign with a faded blue background because that's what that community's requirement was. That Walmart has a white letters with a tan background because that's what that community required. So there's all kinds of that. I think we have picked a more moderate position, trying to recognize how the logos play within their business. At the same point in time, trying to create some standard by which signing can work with the aesthetics of what we're trying to do, landscaping-wise, berms, buildings and so forth. And we have tried to be very sensitive to the businesses as we go forward. I've gotten one email since our chamber forum from McDonald's, and they suggested some things, and a couple of their concerns I don't think they should be concerned about, and they've made some suggestions that have a valid point, and we'll talk about that as we go through the ordinance.
Let me ask a question, Jay. Is there a maximum size to the primary color in the monument sign?
It cannot be the background, and it can be one color. So you do have the total sign area, which basically is your lettering. So a lot of it depends on how you design your sign.
Real big letters would make it interesting, but then not readable.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can see where the major tenant is probably going to come up and say to a shopping center, I want my sign, I want my logo out there. You know, and all of a sudden you're going to have a Publix or a Walmart or whoever. They're going to say we want it to be, known as our shopping center, even though there may be 20 other businesses in there. But that's okay, because that goes along with the placemaking. Everybody knows, if I'm at the Publix on, Bonita Beach and 41. I'm sure that most of the small shops in there advertise on their advertising and tell people, I'm in the Publix, because everybody knows what Publix is. They know that's the Publix sign. And so I think that is there. At the same point in time, if the sign is too small in the building and people have to drive around the shopping center 3 times to find, the Chinese restaurant, that doesn't help them. So we wanted to be able to encourage to have that opportunity for them to be noticed.
So can you say that in this part of the presentation that you've looked at other communities, this has been tested and acceptable in many communities around the country?
We have looked at a lot of different communities. We even have a couple visuals of some of the communities. There's one in Naples. There's one that's a public shopping center, where it's the festival center. Publix has got a little sign on the bottom. You notice it's a muted green with white letters, and Publix is a white letters with brown. Again, there's a Walmart. I think that's a Walmart in Hilton Head, actually, that talk about that's not the typical Walmart sign you see, but that met their architectural standards. There's a McDonald's, and that's not faded, that's the color. Okay, so it's not that they don't do it. Most people would prefer to have their nationally recognized logo.
Right.
And one of the things that we wanted to do was provide that opportunity to them, but we didn't want it to be the predominant factor of the placemaking sign. So we've said, on the monument sign only, you're going to be limited that logo to 20% of the sign area.
So you'd say that this, I would imagine that a lot of companies fabricate their signs early. In other words, they'll make a batch of 20,000 signs. So this should not impact that sort of thing, right?
No, I think what happens, I don't think anybody makes signs early anymore.
Okay.
I think that what happens, experiences that I'm having right now is that, Starbucks, for instance, and they have a company that's not local that does their sign design. And they call up and they say, is this acceptable? Is that acceptable? You give them the information, they design it. And then whether it's manufactured locally or whether it's manufactured shipped, then they hire a local sign company to come and install the sign. That's, I think, become more the standard. And on the national firms, I think what happens is that typically they have probably a half dozen different schemes, and they will try to get a scheme that they already have approved. So you don't allow that color, okay, do you allow this color? Because that way they stay within, again, some variation that they're comfortable with. Okay. And I think that's appropriate, and I think that the way we've written this, that all of those national firms would be able to be accommodated within what we have.
Okay. Any other questions right now?
Just, I just noticed that the ones on here that are not acceptable all have white backgrounds. Are you saying you can't have a white background?
No, we're not saying you can't have white background. If we go back to some of those are unacceptable, the reason they're unacceptable is, we'll take the shops there at Miller's Landing, okay? Can you read each of those individual
No.
ads, and can you do it at 45 miles an hour, or better yet, can you do it at 65 miles an hour, which is what traffic's really driving?
No.
So is that helpful, or is it really more of a safety hazard? And that's the approach we've taken. On the other
Okay.
hand, if you have a sign, much smaller sign, but strategically located, such as the Festival Center, you know if you're looking for the Festival Center, you can see it. One of the other things that we have proposed within this ordinance, and I should have said this earlier, is that currently, signs have to be back 15 feet from the right-of-way. Currently, you have to have a 15-foot buffer for landscaping for your shopping center. So what happens, the sign's behind the landscaping. And so the sign looks great when the trees are this tall. When the trees get mature, it blocks the sign. There's this constant battle. One of the things that we've proposed as part of this change in lowering the sign and the size is that you can have your sign to the right-of-way line.
To the,
Move it to the right-of-way line. Let the sign be in front of the landscaping. And allow, with a betterment plan, the opportunity to take your landscaping, use the landscaping to draw your eye to the sign. So we've given an opportunity here that for people to create a better product. You know, it's like you have a mousetrap, you see how it works, and then eventually you can see how to make it better. Well, we're trying to create that better mousetrap here.
okay. So the one sign that was the darker green background with the white letters could have been white with green letters?
Yes.
With those muted green letters?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's good. I mean, and I like the whole concept of bringing things together and clarifying.
I'm one of the people with the logo. Mine is a descending dove, and it is not copyrighted because I took it from the Bible. I don't think I could copyright the descending dove, but that's my logo. And somehow I feel excluded because it's not a copyrighted thing, but that's not either here or there. One of the issues we have is on this moving the monument signs to the property line as a benefit for visibility and readability. The problem is that no place on Beach Road or on 041, and I assume on 41, 41, no place can you build out to the property line because there's all sorts of things you don't even dream of that are buried under there. In my case, I have telephone lines this big around, and I have sewers, and there's gas lines. There's all kinds of things, and so you have to be back behind that utility easement, which puts you back probably 15 feet anyhow. So as a carrot for going to the smaller monument signs, 8-foot high monument signs, the fact you can move them closer to the road, it really doesn't apply in the real life. It's good on paper, but in the real life world out there are most places you can't do that.
I think there's different opportunities depending where you are. The racetrack sign, for instance, is at the right-of-way line that was just built. And oftentimes, the utilities are actually within the road right-of-way. It's misleading because typically you would think the back of the sidewalk's the road right-of-way. And the way things have been built historically here, that's not the case. The sidewalk is oftentimes 10 feet off the back of the right-of-way line. There are cases that I'm aware of on 41, for instance, that there's an additional 5-foot easement for electric, and that is problematic. One of the other problems that people have had in the past about setting back is that because of the height, you have a circle, if you will, from the power line that you have to be away from for safety reasons. You don't have that problem with the lower signs. And the real question is, you can approach FP&L to put a sign within the right-of-way. Basically, you sign an agreement. They say if we damage it, we're not responsible. But there are opportunities. Those opportunities, though, with the 24-foot tall signs and the fact that to get those that high, you had to drive a pylon or a pole into the ground became a problem. With the smaller signs that can be built on a extended footer, I think that most of those can go away, but there will be cases, you're absolutely right, where that's not going to be possible.
But in terms of your business, those are under the old 41 requirements, which are not addressed.
I understand that. But I was thinking, I see them around, and at a previous presentation that he made, one of the carrots to go to the smaller monument sign was the fact that it could be moved to the property line. But yet, when you investigate that in real life, it's more difficult to do than just saying.
Actually, it is possible. There may be situations where you have to ask more than just the city for permission, but in more cases than not, it is a reality. Now, certain conditions exist where that would make it much more difficult or prohibitive. But overall, if you're looking at the places where existing signs are, if they were to replace them with a new sign, or if they were to look for new development, what we're outlining here is a realistic possibility.
Okay, but I sell flowers, so I don't know. But the people who were in the business, apparently this is a major concern to them. So that's where I got my
The
information.
people in the sign business, or the people in? Okay.
It is, and I had a lot of conversation with Ernie, and Ernie's concerned about it. Ernie Signs. Understand, and he had an instance where he had asked for locates to locate. He went ahead and dug, and he ended up digging up something because locates didn't locate it because it wasn't supposed to be there.
Yes.
Okay? And you know, those things are always going to happen when the utility contractor was supposed to put it over here, and he didn't pay attention, put it over here, and locates comes out and says, oh, it's supposed to be over here. You're gonna have those situations. The other thing is, though, is that historically, those signs are put in an agricast footer where they're drilling down because the height of the sign to meet wind loads, they're drilling down, putting a big footer down there. With these smaller signs, you're not going to have that same construction technique.
Okay, any other questions in this portion?
I've
The portion.
I have several questions on the whole thing, but I don't know
let's
what you
wait
mean
till
by this
the- till
portion.
we hear
You
the
want
whole
to go
story here.
through the page by page, and I'll answer the questions as we go by page?
Yeah, I'd like that,
Okay.
if that works.
Okay. So
Ability?
if we're at page, the first change occurs on page 3 of 51. And basically, we just stated that one of the purposes of the sign ordinance is to be placemaking. And it's a minor change, but to understand that placemaking is what we're trying to do here.
Okay, no
Okay?
problem there.
So, the next change is on page 5.
I think I had some questions in this area
Sure.
around page 5. Maybe I can just cover them all together. I'm referring to things that were written further in the back that were not included in the definitions here that I thought needed to be included.
Okay?
For instance, something I never heard of before was addressed as a blade sign, page 33. I think that needs to be added in the definitions.
Okay?
That would be helpful to me. There's more, a couple more.
Okay?
Page 8, there's something called a feather sign, also on page 33, that probably needs to be added in page 8.
Okay?
I'd actually like to know what some of those signs are. And I had a question on the monument sign. It says where the base of the sign structure is on the ground, and the width at the top of the sign structure can be no more than 120% of the width. Are we looking at a sign that looks like this,
No.
that goes out at the top?
No.
We're looking at a rectangle, or roughly a rectangle.
Yeah, we're looking at a rectangle. Hang on.
Then are you talking about a cornice or something on the top of it?
Yes.
Okay, All right, that was not
And
clear.
One of the things that was approached, that we had talked about was, what if somebody wanted to do something architecturally neat to the sign?
Architecturally,
Architecturally, give it some character,
okay,
okay? And there was a sign, if you will, that was more or less straight on one side and had an angle at the other side. And we said, okay, that's fine. So let's establish a parameter. So within that parameter, if the architect or the sign company wants to do something unique to visually attract people to that sign, we didn't want to stifle two things, their creativity or the opportunity to have some nice architecture to a sign.
okay, okay. I think I might have had one more. It's page 12. It was talked about urban core, page 47, I think. I think we need maybe to define that too in here. They weren't just defining signs in this section, they were defining a lot of things. So I don't know by that if they just mean Old 41 or whether they mean like the intersection of 41 and Bonita Beach Road, or what is urban core?
I think we could
It's in the-
reference 4-1150 at SAC, except we need the
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, whatever works.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was all I had in the definition section. I have some other comments later on, but we can just
Okay,
thumb through
that's
them.
good. Jay, would you like to proceed?
Sure, we'll go through the definition section real quick. And we defined the Bonita Beach Road corridor. That's on page 5. We did add some definitions of color, because obviously if we're going to limit the type of color, there needs to be a way to define it. And so we have done that. We have defined the copy area with a graphic to make that a little bit easier. We've changed or modified the definition and clarified a directional sign. We have defined flags and flagpoles. They were never defined before in the ordinance. We have struck multiple occupancy complexes because under this new proposal, we don't need that definition anymore. We have defined a monument sign, which we just talked about with the width, how we would determine that. We've defined what a multiple story building sign is. That has always been in the code, but was not defined. Pole signs the same way. We don't allow them, but we need to define what we're not going to allow anymore. So that has been added. Pylon sign, the same thing. We have struck through sandwich sign and put a new sandwich sign definition in. We've defined shopping center since we've taken out multiple occupancy complexes. We have we've defined changed the definition of sign to be more inclusive. We have your non-conforming, what makes a non-conforming sign. We've defined temporary signs. We have added the unified sign plan language into it. We have added some graphics as far as visibility of the sign for sight triangles and so forth. These were previously and still are in the land development code, but we felt they should be appropriately added to the sign ordinance so there would be no confusion. Some cleanup on page 13 where it's the Public Works Department that does it, not the Public Works Manager. Again, that's just housekeeping. We have added a definition on page 14 of human signs, basically meaning, the sign twirlers and so forth that you would have. We have made sure that pole and pylon signs are strictly prohibited before they were allowed in certain areas, not allowed in other areas. That language has been cleaned up. On page 15, we get into the color of we're into prohibited signs on page 15, and there's where the color is in that monument signs that have certain color requirements would be prohibited. And that's the prohibition on the colors and the definitions there of what would make it prohibited. I don't think we have another change.
Could I ask something on permitted signs?
Sure.
The one on winter holiday decorations on page 16,
Yes.
is it possible we could change that wording that says may be displayed from November 15th? Could we change that to include Halloween? October 15th or something like that?
I would.
That's getting to be a really big business today.
If you want to do that, I think that I would put another definition of what type of sign that's going to be, a holiday sign versus the winter holiday.
Jacqueline Genson, for the record, if you look at H, I mean, that might help you with the Halloween where it can be addressed.
And are these just for public buildings, or are they for residences too? Do they,
It's for
Commercial.
commercial.
commercial strictly?
The major
I don't-
difference being that the winter holiday decorations, people generally start their sales and their shopping for the Christmas and holidays. And typically, these temporary signs are allowed for 15 days. Well, that would be sort of ridiculous when you know there's a season that goes from November through January.
Yeah, I
And-
say ditto to Halloween though, because they were here in August.
Yeah, I know, and so that was just an attempt so that if you're going to do those temporary type signs, that there's a beginning and an end to it. Because if not, I know that some stores have got Christmas decorations in them already. So, and are selling them. Do we want to start Christmas in September? And so we needed to put a time limit, a definition on it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the time limits. I just wanted them to be recognized. You can say 2 weeks down after the holiday's over, or a week down after the holiday's over, but just allow them to be put up maybe a little earlier.
Yeah, I think the intent is with the holidays, it's a longer period, whereas with the other holidays, you could have your decorations up 1 week before and 1 week after. But again, we want to make sure that we're keeping a very aesthetically pleasing city, and if we allow more, you might just get a blending of extra signage you may not want.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Let me ask a question, Jay. How would you define applique and caricatures, cutouts that we mounted on buildings as part of the architecture? Now, it's not addressed here specifically. I'm thinking about in a case of motion picture or theater, something like that.
Well, actually, we do have a proposal in here. I think that's probably the best way to handle that. Talk about it real quick, but we'll see the change a little further on. We recognize that one size doesn't fit all. The problem with recognizing that, and I'll take the example of a movie theater. It may be appropriate for a movie theater to have a different type of sign, to have a larger sign, different configuration, shape, because of the nature of the business. And it may be very appropriate that they have that. That people expect to see a ticket booth. They expect to see certain things so that they know where they're going, and that's what they want to do. And we believe that's an appropriate concept. The problem becomes if I permit a sign that works for the movie theater and they go out of business, or a performing arts theater, they go out of business, and if the code allows a car dealership to come in and the car dealership takes that sign and abuses it because it's not appropriate, okay? So what we have proposed in here is that not a variance, but a special exception that allows a sign to be assigned to a specific use. So if you have a specific use and you want to apply for a sign that is unique to that use, the approval of which will be extinguished when the use is extinguished, there's that opportunity. And that was one of the things after the conversation with the businesses and the sign companies that we felt was an appropriate accommodation to recommend. And so we will get to that here shortly.
Could I ask you
Good.
what,
Thank you.
what you were referring to, are you talking about the signs that have the posters that are inside the lighted metal things with the glass that's prohibited in many places?
No, I wasn't talking about that. Let's say, for example, Rex wants to put an ice cream cone on the face of his building. Signs like that.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
An example might be, and that's a good example. It might be that that doesn't fit the sign code. Okay, it might be that maybe it's too big, it's in the wrong location, whatever. It doesn't meet the sign code. Is that necessarily a bad thing? And on a case-by-case basis, the city council ought to be able to say, you know what, in that location for that business, that makes sense, but we don't want, an ice cream cone there if it becomes a auto stereo installation place, okay? So that if that's the case, that if that business ceases, that sign ceases. And that's what we're trying to do with the special
Okay,
exception.
that makes
There's
sense.
there should be opportunities, because businesses are unique in their nature. And what may work for one business wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in other places. And so a movie theater is an easy one to highlight, because they may have a sign where they're changing the copy because there's a new act, a new movie, things happening. At the same point in time, you don't want flashing lights and other things
Okay,
that may be
so
inappropriate.
in a movie theater, then that thing like with a poster that's inside the metal, with the glass over the top that's on like beside their doors or wherever
Well,
they put it,
and it could be
is
that
okay.
depending on the size of the complex, the layout and everything else, that maybe they exceed the percentages. So the opportunity, what we're going to do is have the opportunity for a business to come in and make their case why their sign should
Okay.
be considered
Okay,
differently.
well, that's good.
And we think there's reasons that there's certain businesses may have a reason to do that. So on the other hand, you don't want everybody to be able to just come in and say, oh, I want 80% of my storefront to be signs because I want it.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be something that would go through council.
Okay, well, the flexibility that you have then is good.
But the
Thank you.
someplace in here, and I can't find it real quick here, but when you're talking about special exceptions, it says they're to be discouraged. I think that's the verbiage in here.
I'm going to refer to Audrey on that, but the idea is that we want you to understand that you need to make your case.
Why don't you just,
It's not going to be it's not a rubber stamp, in other words.
yeah,
You come in and make your case that why this is, and that obviously you always want to encourage people as much as they can to operate within the code. Okay, so
just change the word and say approved by city
I think
on a case-by-case basis or something.
yeah, I think that language will end up getting modified some.
It will be getting modified. It is we need to be careful how we modify, so we don't make something arbitrary and capricious. We don't want it where there's unlawful delegation to community development to make a determination. So there has to be some caution in how we deal with it.
What is the cost of a special exception in this particular case?
I don't know if we've
Signage
decided that.
Jacqueline Genson for the record, it varies.
varies.
And then if it's not addressed in the fee schedule, we would be adopting a new fee as part of this action.
What's an idea of the range? It could
Typically
be
between 1,500 and 2,500.
And then there's advertising costs that are associated with that. That can be another $1,000 for newspaper advertisements and mailings.
pretty expensive.
The point of not encouraging people to do it, I think the fee takes care of that point.
Price them out of the market.
Well, I don't know that we want to price them on the market, but I mean, if you're going to come in for a special exception, you're serious. You're going to have a well thought out plan, and you're going to be serious if you're going to apply for a special exception, or you anticipate the person would.
I'm thinking about that one, Jay. Mainly because there are some businesses that, as a barber pole would indicate that it's a barber shop. You have cases like that, and it's symbolic for that particular business. To prove that it's symbolic is pretty expensive if it's up around $1,500. That's my point, is that what's equitable here for the general public?
Ms. Ginson outlined that if we're going to be setting up a specific fee for this application, that would have to come through as a resolution after this was passed. We could do that and taking into consideration those concerns.
Okay. And I would think that staff, when it does come up, before it goes for special exception, staff is then reviewing, talking with the public and trying to get them through the process without perhaps that sort of thing happening, an expensive special exception.
Signs that are permitted are approved, and those that are not permitted are not approved.
And actually, we were already at page 19, but page 20, the bottom of it is where we talk about the special exception process as it's been outlined.
I have a question too on an
Sure.
earlier page before we get there. I'm looking at page, I think 14 and 18. The top of 18 under F, it says any balloon sign greater than 3 1/2 feet in diameter, blah, blah, blah. But on the other page earlier,
Oh, that needs to be corrected.
it has a different, let me see if I can find it now. It talks about 3 feet.
I
No,
think you
I-
found an area that needs to be corrected to be consistent with the changes in 6.6 and 6.111.
Oh, okay, and that was my point. It confused me, because it,
This one talks about the height of the
I'm trying to find it on 14. Balloons, here we are. Yeah, in the middle of the page on 14.
which is the same.
So I didn't know if you needed to make them both 3 feet and both 3 1/2, or whether you meant to have a 1/2 foot variance in there.
Well, there's two things. Number one, on 14 are signs that are prohibited. And so balloons are prohibited
The double
except,
prohibition.
And it says if they're under 3 feet,
Right.
they're,
The one that
Okay.
doesn't need a sign permit is if it's under 3.5 feet. So this just adds that. I think we
Right.
need to look at it to just make it consistent.
yes, that's my point. And it confused me, and I thought it needed to be consistent.
No, thank you.
we need to put 3.5 feet on 7, I think. We'll take a look at that.
On both of them?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You can continue, Jay.
Back to page, bottom of 20. I think actually we're on 21. Again, that's the process that's outlined, currently outlined as to how we would proceed with the special exceptions.
And this section will be changing a little bit, so the version that council will see will look different from this, but we will be changing this section.
When we get to page 22, we're talking about permits, the permitting process for a sign. And if you, at the top of page 22, at number 3, we talk about that they need to comply with the unified sign plan. That's the language that's been added to coincide with what's in the land development code. If you come down to B1D, one of the things that we've added after our discussions with the sign companies is the property owner or the shopping center manager needs to approve the sign, so that we don't get to a habit where we get caught in the middle of a landlord-tenant fight over what sign got put up. And we haven't really had too much of a problem with that, but the sign companies have. And so they said, it would really make things better if we did this, and so we've accommodated them with that.
I had a question,
Sure.
sort of, that goes along with that, about protections for the property owner. I understand you're saying that if they do a sign, the property owner has to sign something that says, okay. But if the city has a problem, is going to cite the business for a violation, do they also notify the property owner?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I read that, but I wasn't sure.
And the reason is that when code enforcement cites, they'll cite the business, they'll notice the property owner, because if the code enforcement process results in a lien, it's
Yeah.
a lien against the property.
Right, I read that,
So
and I was concerned.
This just reinforces, I think, protects the property owner better to make sure that they have signed off on that. Sign companies had explained us problems they had had, and when we thought about it in its totality, it made a lot of sense to add this.
Okay, I just hated to see the property owner not know there was a violation and get stuck with having to pay a fine that he could have helped correct.
Yeah, they
if
get
he'd have known
notice
about
in
it.
code enforcement action, the property owner does.
Okay, okay. Oh, and there's a typo on under B1C3, or 2. You have an R there, OR. Probably want to
And
just
because
wipe
we
it out.
struck, right, thank you,
Just, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
thank you.
Over on the next page, too, does the 3 at the top of the page, does that mean, it says bond or other securities for certain type signs? Are you saying for certain type of temporary signs?
Yes.
Do you need to add that word in there?
Well, I have a question. Did we change to put political signs back in, Audrey?
And I had a
Talking
question on
about-
that, too.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, actually, that's a change that was made. It's not reflected here. The strike-through on A is no longer a strike-through.
Okay, because I had that as a question also.
That was a point of discussion, and the deletion didn't get deleted.
Okay, so the temporary thing needs to be put in 3, or
Well,
not?
actually, the language is fine now because
Okay.
it includes political signs and temporary signs.
Okay, okay. Good.
What page are we on?
We're on
23 or 24?
24 now,
Okay.
and now we're going to get to the
I have a
biggest
question on
controversy. Yeah.
24. I come to life finally. Let's go to page 11 in the definitions, and I think, we have a new definition there of a non-conforming sign. And it says it's a sign that was lawfully existing at the time of this development ordinance, which no longer conforms to the land development standards because of this amendment. So we have a new definition for a non-conforming sign that became non-conforming not because of anything but this ordinance.
Actually, it's more universal than that. It would mean that any sign that was legally permitted that then became non-conforming because of any amendment to a sign ordinance.
All right, I'll grant you that, but in this particular case, we go over to page 24, D, and now we are down to this ordinance. It says, "A sign permit shall expire and become null and void 6 months from the date of issue," so that when I go up and get a sign permit, my sign permit does not have any expiration date on it. I assume it's like a marriage license, they're forever.
No, sir. Actually,
And I have a whole bunch of sign permits,
Any-
and none of them have an expiration date on them.
any building permit has a 6-month expiration date unless an inspection is scheduled or that permit has been finalized. At
I
which case,
understand
there
that,
is no
but
expiration date.
that is for the construction of it. You have to comply with
Correct.
those requirements.
And that's what this is
But once
referencing.
it's done, this sign permit is forever.
Yes, sir. And that,
Okay, now, but here we're saying that we are
Yes.
going to go down, and under 639, under A, it talks about this ordinance, and it says, "Every sign as of the effective date of this ordinance," and that's what we're talking about here, "from this chapter, which is permitted legally existing signs shall be deemed a legal non-conforming sign. A permitted sign that was constructed before the city became an incorporation is okay." And in my particular case, that's where I stand. But I look at this on 639 in the status, and I say to myself, our instructions here at this board is to review for consistency with the comprehensive plan. That's what our instructions are. They don't really ask us whether we like the color or not. It's just, does it comply with the comp plan? So I went through the comp plan, and I didn't see any place where it gave the authority to take away a legally permitted anything, zoning, land zoning thing, or a sign or anything that has, that the customer or the citizen went and got with the anticipation, he paid the money, he did all the things he was supposed to do, and now he has a permit, and now we're saying that through this ordinance, we can void that permit.
Actually,
No,
we
sir.
do. For properties that have higher densities, if they want to redevelop, they have to come back and get a plan development. So in some cases, the city does do that.
But
I don't see that,
What do you, before we go too far afield, what do you think we are taking away? Because if you have a permit and it's active, you have a permit. So what do you think that we are removing?
all right, what you're taking away is back here on page 11. As I interpret, maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I'm saying back on page 11, under sign nonconforming, it says a sign lawfully existing at the time of adoption is now taken away and becomes now a nonconforming sign.
I will give you an example to show you that I think we are on the same page and your concerns have been addressed. When this was originally proposed, we asked the council to approve a zoning in progress, which would have prevented the issuance of permits that are consistent with the existing ordinance but are not consistent with the proposed ordinance. Council denied that request. We issued sign permits that will no longer be consistent with this ordinance if it is approved. Now, those signs have 6 months from the time the building permit is issued before they expire. They have the ability to construct those signs, and they can construct those signs after this ordinance takes effect because they have an active building permit. Now, if something happens to those signs, they fall under this non-conforming section of the code. But no one has told them that those signs have to be removed, and no one has asked them to modify that permit prior to construction.
Okay, but, all right, now I'm looking for a trigger. What is going to trigger that sign? When they come in and ask, for example, to change the copy or change the faces or something?
That's going to be one of the other sections that talks about when they do need to come into compliance. And I think that's one of the questions that we really want to present to council as to a question of policy. Because we have certain sections of the code that establish that trigger at 25% of the area. And we have other sections of the code that have that trigger at 25% of the value. I'm sorry, 50% of both of those. So I misquoted. It's not 25, it's 50. And what we are asking them is what percentage do you want for those triggers?
All right,
And-
we're digressing, John. I agree with what you're saying. We do have a trigger point that we can establish, and that's fine. It's like the 50% rule on a remodel of a
Correct.
building and so forth. The point I'm getting at is that we are giving the authority for someone to make a permit that was issued in good faith after the fact. They're making it possible to revoke that permit. That's
We are
what it
revoking.
says.
I think we're talking some apples and some oranges here, okay? There's two sign permits for clarity. It's not exactly two sign permits, but the sign permit process is a twofold process. You come in and you get a sign permit to build the sign. That sign permit becomes void if that sign is not built within 6 months.
That's true. That we have a
Okay.
time element that's established.
So
That's already exists.
that's the first thing that we're talking about.
Okay.
When you get your CO or CC for that sign, your completion to that sign, you get a little sticker that you put on the sign that says, "Here's my sign permit." That sticker isn't
They
being,
come off in about 6 months anyway.
right, but that sticker is not being revoked, okay? But what happens is that sign becomes a valid, a legal, non-conforming sign. It is a sign that legally exists, but it no longer conforms to the ordinance. And so the first thing we do to define the non-conforming is what is legally existing. The fact that it was built by permit, the fact that when it was built, when it was permitted, that it met the requirements of the code, even though it no longer does, even though the code has changed, it's a legal sign. And so that's the first thing. The question that arises is when we get to the next page is what would cause you to lose that legal status? Okay? That's really the important question. What would cause you to lose that permit, to lose that
I
sticker?
evidently didn't ask exactly the right question.
Okay.
Let's go back. I'm saying that the comprehensive plan does not give the authority to anyone in the comprehensive plan. It may be in something else, but in the comprehensive plan, I don't think it gives anybody the authority to change or revoke a legally permitted permit.
And I
Let me
think that
answer
comes down to
that.
the question. I don't know what we're revoking.
I think I can answer maybe your concern on a more philosophical basis.
Okay?
Okay, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking sign code, it doesn't, anything within the land development code. Remember, the purpose of the land development regulations is to implement the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan is part of the local government comprehensive planning land development regulation act. So the whole purpose of doing a comprehensive plan, we were suddenly mandated in 1984 to start, I mean, I know, don't even say how old you were, where you were, because I will probably kill you at this point. We were at that time told, hey, governments, you need to have a comprehensive plan. We were all put on cycles, so that we could all get scheduled. Governments did different fights. There were moratoriums where you weren't allowed to issue building permits, all the nasty stuff that happened in the 80s and early 90s. And the state law says once you adopt that comprehensive plan, everything has to be consistent and in conformity. So again, we're using the term non-conforming. So when we have development, it doesn't matter whether we're talking signs, it doesn't matter whether we're talking size of lots. We have to deal with how do we address those non-conformities. And the provision of 639 is to address nonconforming as it applied to signs, no different than in LDC Chapter 4. We have how you deal with uses, how you deal with size of lots, how you deal with mobile homes, I think is one of them, RV parks. There is a whole gambit of different nonconforming provisions because you have so many different nonconforming. Now, the devil is with the details. And when you pointed out the first sentence, and I need to tell you, there's a gentleman in the audience, and he's a younger lawyer than I am, so again, he's probably closer in age with John Dolmer. Pointed out that there are some things to the first sentence that did not read right. And I tend to agree with him, which probably kills lawyers trying to be an adversary because, I don't have a problem. And I think the first sentence needs to be changed that every sign as of the existing date of the ordinance from which this chapter is derived, which was, not is, was a permitted legally existing sign, but is no longer permitted under this sign code, shall be deemed a legal nonconforming sign. So that it's very clear that the affected signs are those that now we have changed the rules. Now hopefully we allow signs plenty of amortization. We allow signs. We try to hope that, I think the city's philosophy has always been, eventually they will tear it down.
I'm with you, and I hear what you're saying. I still go back to our comp plan, and I cannot find in my own mind where this, even a change in zoning or a change in permitting, is this board. Now, the city council may be able to do it, but this board, I don't see any place in there where it can happen. So I'm of the opinion, right at the moment, that all this discussion we're having about this thing is that the whole thing doesn't comply with the comp plan because there's no place in the comp plan for this action to take place.
And I understand what you're saying, but let's use a different analogy. The comprehensive plan is like a city charter, is like a Bible. I use that, I think all of you have heard me use that as an analogy. if you would say, well, the Bible was written but does not apply to such and such circumstances dealing with automobiles because they didn't talk about automobiles, and you make that strict construction that, well, since it doesn't have that communication, therefore it's not applicable, then that's a very strict constructionist type reading, where most people would say, hey, you could find that this story has parallel meaning because of X, Y, Z.
No.
Of course, I'm not doing Bible study, so I won't try to
No,
figure out the Bible part.
I'm going to disagree there.
The
I look
state's-
at this, when you talk about, in reference to the Bible, I look at this and I think it needs to be very specific. And I do not believe the way that this is structured, that it is in our existing comp plan, that you can go line by line and say, this is the place where this takes effect. It's not there.
I think that you have, and I understand, I think, where you're coming from. I think in the comp plan, though, you do have items within the comp plan that you're allowed to address, okay? And the comp plan is more general, and I think you're allowed to address aesthetics. You're allowed to address safety. You're allowed to address a lot of different issues, densities, roadways, how utilities are provided. I think that within those things, aesthetics is one of them. I think that what happens is that that's sort of like the general rule, and the adoption of ordinances is how where the rubber meets the road and how you're trying to do that. So when we're looking out for the health, safety, and welfare of the community, which is really where the comp plan goes, and that's where the zoning ordinance goes, how do we implement that? Now, there can be an honest debate whether or not you think signs affect health, safety, and welfare, but the fact is that there are those who do feel that's an effect, because it affects property values, it affects aesthetics, it affects how neighborhoods develop. And so it's well within the scope. Now, is there a direct correlation where it says non-conforming or signs, or if something happens? No. It's in the broader sense of the comp plan.
All right, and I agree with you wholeheartedly up to there. But when you go back to the instructions that we are given here, it says this board, is to review for consistency with the City of Bonita's comprehensive plan. And this does not. So we can, the
Okay.
city council has a broad range of powers, and they can go, like you're suggesting, that there's areas outside. But as far as this board goes, it seems to me that our instructions are very clear, that it has to comply with the Bonita Springs comprehensive plan, and I don't find any place in there where this is allowed. And so I'm taking the position, rightly or wrongly, that this ordinance, as it is presented to us today, does not meet the comprehensive plan.
I want to understand your concerns, but to this point, I have not. Are you saying that we do not have the ability to have a non-conforming section of the code? Are you saying that we do not have the ability to enforce current standards at a certain threshold for existing signs? Or is there another concern that I'm missing?
Well, I'm not sure I'm following you exactly, but what I'm saying here is that our definition is well-defined of our duties here. And the material that you have presented to us, in my mind, is outside of the strict writing that exists in the comprehensive plan.
And that's what I
So
want to get
this
at. What is that?
board-
What are you saying is inconsistent?
This, because there is no place in the comp plan that gives somebody the ability to void an existing permit.
Nobody's voiding a permit.
Well, they're changing it.
But if what you're saying is true, the rules and regulations at the time zoning was first created
I
can
agree,
never
John.
can never be
It-
changed.
Right.
But that's the city council. That's not us.
No.
We are bound by the comp plan. And if the comp plan doesn't say this, legally, I think this board would be obligated to say if it's not in the comp plan.
If what you're
then-
saying, then this board really would have no purpose in reviewing consistency with the comprehensive plan, because what you're saying is that no change would be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
If the
Because any-
comprehensive plan didn't address something, then therefore, you know, and I understand there's a distinction between what Ms. Gallagher and I were talking about before, because that was something that was in a police power situation. Now, this is land development regulations, and if you look at what is the purpose of a local planning agency, it's to review the ordinances to determine whether they're consistent or not. Now, to do an ordinance, it's to implement the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. There is language in state law saying that you do need to have sign codes. Whether the sign codes are good or bad is a whole nother issue. And that is part of, you know, land planning. I don't think anybody would make the argument that signs are not a particular use of land. I
We're
guess-
not arguing about the sign. The signs are not the issue.
No.
The issue in my mind is that our comp plan does not give the authority for the expiration of a sign permit for everybody at a certain time once this ordinance is passed. It's kind of an
There is no,
automatic thing.
I think
And
that,
then, so I look at it and say, the city council could do that, but we have a very definite, limited,
I understand what you're saying, or at least I believe I understand what you're saying now, and I think that there is a simple solution to this. Those permits are not going to expire. They don't expire any differently than any other permit that is being issued, whether it is consistent or inconsistent with the sign code. If it was issued legally, and that's what we're talking about, permits that were legally issued for a sign, regardless of whether they are consistent with this ordinance or consistent with the existing ordinance, they are valid permits. The expiration language you were referencing does not single out or specify that those permits that are inconsistent with this proposed ordinance, but consistent with the previous ordinance, expire. So there is no difference in how those permits are treated. So those permits that are not going to expire just because the ordinance changes. Those permits only expire if there has not been an inspection or that permit has not been finalized prior to that 6-month period, which is the same as any other building permit. So there is no distinction made with
I draw a distinction with you, John. We go back to page 11 to the definition of a non-conforming sign, and it becomes non-conforming by the action of this ordinance. And so this ordinance is the trigger. And I'm saying that our comp plan doesn't have the authority to, or I don't see any place in it where it specifically says that that is permissible in our comp plan.
Well, I'd probably agree with you, but that's not how we're going to that's not how this is going to be enforced. It's not how I understand it reads.
Well, it may be in everybody's mind, but as I read it, this is what you brought to us, and this is what we've made out of it. And I'm strongly of the opinion that
We,
it
Well,
does
I-
not comply.
okay.
that,
Well, there is a place here under goals, objectives, and policies, it says, and is consistent with the availability of essential services. And certainly, signs and essential services are
no.
lockstep.
Good try.
Well, your signs and your services, say your medical or any kind of service, they,
The
But
services
I'm
of
just,
those-
I'm just making a case for this being under the comp plan.
But it's not the sign that is the issue here, to me, it's the procedure. And I'm saying it's not whether it's a sign or whether it's a piece of dirt that we're redoing, that is zoned by right, and we're taking it away.
Well-
It's the same analogy.
No, I'm going to give you an example that happens every day in the city that I think is right on point. According to our comprehensive plan, we adopt the federal emergency management regulation. Houses constantly come in here because every couple of years they change the requirements for the floodplain. And we have houses that come in and we say, if you exceed this percentage of improvement, you must raise the house, flood-proof the house. You must reinforce it to meet hurricane standards. And I don't see that as being any different than the sign situation, because it is a life, safety, health, welfare ordinance. And I think the sign is covered within that, and we do that every day when people want to redevelop on Hickory Island. When they want to develop over, north of Bonita Beach Road, west of 41, all of those homes as they come in, they have to meet those standards. And so, and they are legally non-conforming.
You're exactly right. Now, when we go to that, and your example is very good, because they are a legal entity. But here we're doing something a little bit different. We are passing a local ordinance, which now makes this non-conforming. And I say the city council can do that. But I don't think this board can do that because it's not in the comp plan.
Just,
Comp plan, remembers, like the Bible. It'll be in there.
Well, and it depends whether you're a strict constructionist or, you could say people we don't have obsidians, we don't have, you wouldn't have people being able to go outside of the atmosphere. There's tons of stuff that,
So Audrey, is there anything in the comp plan that,
obviously I'm not a strict constructionist believer, but,
that
yeah.
references the ability for this board to, in situations like this, to be able to judge this?
Yes, I think, first of all, both by statute as well as the comprehensive plan, that, you're to look at the land development regulations to determine whether or not it's going to do something that will create a better approval or more aesthetic, safety, again, not talking about police power, but, for the traffic. This is no different than when you look at traffic analysis to make sure that the roads are safe. You're doing the same thing here. You're looking at the changes that Mr. Sweet is suggesting are changes that allow for hopefully better destination driving, safer driving. This is not just aesthetics. This is, there's a lot of different reasons why you want to adopt the code. I'm in the comp plan right now, but does it say signs as it pertains to non-conforming? No. It does have language in there that says that you will review things for consistency, how to address inconsistencies, because we had that with plats. We had it certainly with density. Different, times have changed, and, there's lots of record that have different, the code grants me authority to do minimum use determinations so that people can build on their parcel, because we recognize there's some needs for it. No different than, and every non-conforming provision is going to read slightly different, because as people are trying to decide whether or not, and it's a value judgment issue, and I recognize that. This is all value judgment.
But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I've been on this board since the city was formed. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that this situation has come here, which triggers me to think this is substantially different than the normal things we look at.
Well, first of all, 639 has been in the sign code, so when you reviewed it in 2005, it was there. When you reviewed it in 2009, it was there. So this code has not, I forgot what other years we changed it. He worked on one of the changes when he worked for Mr. LaRue. So my guess is this language has not changed, and the language that you're actually addressing, which, as we pointed out, Mr. Hertz pointed out that there was some language that, to make it probably make more sense. This was something that has always been in the code. So I guess how to address those signs, and then the question comes up, and this is no different than the conversation you had today with Alexis when we were dealing with large-scale retail, and how do you bring in the fold when you have those changes? So, if you start taking a strict constructionist viewpoint of it's not in the comp plan, therefore thou shalt not touch it, you already did it today.
Well, we had the only thing I could see that was similar was when we were doing the homeless shelter thing. That was an ordinance situation that changed a land use that was in existence. And here we've got something that is changing a permit use that's already been issued.
And I'm going to disagree with you gently, because when I'm native Floridian, you've been in Florida many, many years. We won't go try to figure out exactly what year. But, you know, it used to be that if you wanted to put signs up, you just needed your hammer and you needed to go to the hardware store to get, and if you wanted to spend some good money, you know, for a nice, fancier, better structural sign, you did so. So the sign codes really didn't come into place until the 80s. I don't think any,
Early 80s.
yeah, nobody had sign codes prior to like 1980s. You just basically went up and plunk, plunk, plunk and put it on the land, and you either had the rights from the landowner or you put in the right of way. And Florida was nice and messy. And, you know, the sign code has been an evolutionary process, and each area has done different forms of evolution with it. But that's where we are, and one of the ways or techniques to get rid of signs that might not have been permitted or it was legal at the time they put it in because the person had their hammer and that was the only code that was required, you know, it was done. I mean, later on, we looked at wind loading, and later on, we looked at aesthetics. I mean, codes have changed over times.
But it appears to me that that this is a kind of a new wrinkle as far as this committee goes.
No, sir.
No,
This is the same wrinkle that you've been looking at since there were wrinkles.
right, and when, I'll take example, Bonita Beach Road corridor. When I can remember sitting with you and Mr. Chicaney and Mr. Warner and Mr. Spear, a few others, I'm just gonna go with that right now, just, you know, and I remember we wanted to outlaw uses on Bonita Beach Road. And I was the one, if I recall, having more of the heart attack than anybody else because, you know, we were saying, we don't want car lots out there. We don't want different uses that we didn't like. And we said, well, we'll just make it where we do special exceptions of plan development. But I had some people who were gung-ho, wanted to just outlaw specific commercial uses on commercial property. And that was
Good
2002.
example. If there had already been a car lot there that had been permitted, could this board approve an ordinance that would now make that car lot illegal? Essentially, that's.
You
you do
could,
that
but it
by-
would never force it out. It would simply prohibit another car lot from coming in.
I understand that.
And
This one is taking a definite action on a specific thing. That's what,
And you're correct. We're not
Well-
disagreeing there, but that's why you have amortization. That's why you have techniques to remove uses that people no longer want. Now, if you feel that the uses of, let's say, we want signs only to be the color red and the color yellow. We're going to mandate that you use primary colors. For some reason, we feel that we want our drivers to be distracted because we think that'll be better traffic calming. And I hope nobody takes me seriously when I say these things. I mean, you could mandate certain color signs and then require them to come into that fold and require those. I mean, if that's what the planning determines is the appropriate thing at that point.
but science is not the issue here. The issue that I have with this is the authority granted to somebody to change a permit that a person got in good faith, and now somebody has the authority to change it, and I don't think this comp plan says we can do that, and that's my problem with it. It's
And
not
actually,
the
that's the
size.
whole purpose of the Growth Management Act.
hold on. We are not changing a permit.
You're changing it to non-conforming. I think that's what
Yes.
he's saying.
But we are not asking anybody to modify a permit. We're not asking anybody to build something different. If you've got a permit, you got a permit. You can go build your permit. And
We're gonna move on with
Could it-
this. We've
Could I say
debated, yeah,
one more thing about this, but not the same thing that he's saying?
okay.
I have a suggestion. The way this is worded, I mean, it's understandable, but it gets a little confusing when you get down here to 639A. When you talk about a legal non-conforming sign and signs which are not legal non-conforming, or illegal non-conforming, I suggest that over on the definition page, which is 11, under sign non-conforming, you say there are two types of signs. There is a legal non-conforming, and then a little bit about that, and then there is an illegal non-conforming.
Right.
All right, what is an illegal non-conforming sign?
It's
Wouldn't that
written,
just-
it's used down here in A. That's the point. That's why I'm saying it's confusing.
And
A
probably
is
it
the
just needs-
problem in this.
A is, and I,
639A is the problem, and page 11, the definition
And
is
we'll
a
correct
problem.
because
Those
you're,
two things
you're,
are a
you're
problem.
referring to legal in A, non-conforming, and illegal non-conforming. And
Right.
if you're going to use those two terms, you need to define them.
And really, there should not be an illegal, non-conforming sign. It should be.
Well, it
either-
says not legal.
Right, it should be
which-
either a legal, non-conforming sign or an illegal sign, meaning
Well,
code enforcement should be telling them to take it out.
Okay, well, let's take that off, let's
wait, wait,
change
wait,
these
wait.
definitions
Hold on,
here.
hold on. You have the floor.
Oh, I just think that you read one thing in 639A, and then you go over to page 11, and you read about a non-conforming sign, which it says a lawfully existing, but no longer conforms to the new codes, but it was predating the new codes. That's fine, if you want to call that non-conforming. But don't go over here on 639A and use legal non-conforming and then say not legal non-conforming, because that is confusing.
Well, okay.
Just fix the words.
If we need to make a change in definitions, we'll do that. Because it is important within this ordinance as it is to distinguish when a legal, non-conforming sign loses its legal status.
Yeah, and
So you have to use those two words. So if we need to change it to non-conforming legal in the sign definitions, then that's probably the easiest thing. Because for the purpose of distinguishing when it is legal and when it becomes no longer legal, we have to use that language within 639.
that needs to be cleared up. And the other thing in this that he was talking about was under D, the expiration of a sign permit. I think when I read that the first time, I thought of the permit with a number on the sign, that the sign expired after 6 months, because that's what it sounds like. And that's not what you mean here. You mean the time you get the permit and the 6 months to get it the sign erected. But I don't think that that's clear.
We'll just add after sign permit,
You have 6
where it
months
says
to
shall
erect
expire,
this.
you say sign permit for construction.
Construction and final inspection.
Yes, something about construction and final, yes. Need to fix that.
It's on page 24.
Audrey,
D.
this will be coming
It's
back
D
to us
on
for
24.
a second time.
It's,
It's existing language, but
oh, that's why it's up here.
it's existing language in the code currently.
I'd like to.
I'll sit with staff. We may need to have a special meeting because, I mean, I can't do your third Thursday
Right.
because that's after the third Wednesday. It doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it depends on when it falls in the calendar. So if we could have a LPA meeting in the second Thursday, I can meet.
Of October,
Of October?
That's fine.
to see what changes have been made to this or other considerations, right?
Yeah, I certainly, because we may have color palette come back by that time. I don't know if we will or we won't.
Okay.
But certainly both ordinances, I think if you don't mind meeting at a different day, you know, instead of the third being the second. Deb? October 9th? And that would be in between both so that would work out well, because it would be in between both.
Okay. What I want to do is be sure that we get the intent of what Rex is arguing here cleared up,
Oh, you have it.
because it affects a lot of decisions that we will make. Because,
Anybody see it besides me? Am I the only?
Well, I didn't see it exactly the same way, but I had issues I'd already written down on that point.
well, that's what I'm saying here, is I'd like to get cleared up the concept of what we do here, what the limitations are on that. We've done so many other times, is what I've seen, that over time, almost everything becomes non-conforming. And you have to have a mechanism that says that you got to deal with that in some way. Here, I thought the fact that if you change 25%, which is the change, that you will bring into discussion whatever it is you're doing to the sign. And I don't see anything wrong with putting a number on that, 50 or 25%. 50's been in there. So, I mean, let's get some clarification here on the kinds of issues that we deal with and what we can say is compliant with the comprehensive code and not, because we're making a lot of decisions under that assumption. So maybe on the 9th, we can come back and have another discussion after staff has had a chance to sort of ferret this confusion out, somewhat of confusion. Let's do it, and we'll move on now.
Okay.
And at the end, we'll be taking and this, we're going to see this again, right? This is not a final vote on this, so,
No, since we're meeting October
It's final
9th,
vote.
we can go in between.
well, it's a final vote on this here, so we're going to take a vote at the end here as to whether or not it's going to pass to council or with stipulations or not. So let's
Okay.
complete.
Okay, let's move
presentation.
on. I knew non-conforming would be an issue, but the real question on non-conforming, the code is currently written because we have the Bonita Beach Road corridor portion, and we have the rest of the city. We have two different standards for how you become an illegal or a not legal non-conforming sign. And one is a 25% standard, and one is a 50% standard. The Bonita Beach Road corridor was a 25% standard, and it seems that was intentional in order to hasten the redevelopment, the correction of that. And so we have proposed in here to stay with the Bonita Beach corridor language, which is 25%. As you look through the loss of legal nonconformity section on page 25, basically you'll see that the only strike-throughs is where we've stricken through the Bonita Beach Road corridor so that it becomes citywide. And I will say that the one letter I did get, one email I got from the people from McDonald's, they had suggested and asked that it be at 50% instead of 25, and that was the comment that I did get from them. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's the same language that currently exists for the Bonita Beach Road corridor.
So the old 41 is included in here too?
Everything,
Whole city?
the entire city be included in here now. No, the Old 41 has its own standards.
Well, that's what I was thinking
And
when I
that's-
asked
and
that
that's-
question.
Well, Old 41 has its own standards, and that's within a separate ordinance.
Okay.
Because, for instance, in Old 41, you can't have a monument sign anymore.
Okay, is that
There's a
clear?
lot
in-
of
Is
different
that
steps.
clear in here that there's
That's
Another-
yes.
It's
Um,
clear in
I-
the fact
I
that we
read
have a
it somewhere.
section that's titled Old 41. So it
Okay.
has its own distinct section.
Okay, it might be good to maybe put it in the intro of this and say
It's
Old
actually under
41.
this section for Old 41, so all the regulations are in one place.
Okay, all right.
Jane, let me ask, when McDonald's made this recommendation to you or suggestion, was 25% better than 26? It's not a silly question because we want to know where these percentages come from.
And it's a situation where you have to find something that is easily interpreted. So it's not so much that 25 is better than 26 and significantly better than 27. It's a matter of 25% reaches the common threshold for understanding that there is a difference. And it also allows not only the business owners, but the sign companies, city staff, and general public to know where that threshold is located, and it gives them something to imagine. You could split hairs, do 26, 27.
Yeah.
Those are all within your purview, but it does reach the level where you could see a significant change, and we could justify that change at 25%.
I like that answer because it's based on something real, such as a 25% change is large enough to a sign to make a big difference in the way it's perceived, whereas 27 may not, or 30 may not, or 50, Okay, thank you.
Okay. On page 26, we're starting to see a lot of strike-throughs. Those are things we've eliminated from the code simply because they're not required under the approach that we've taken.
Could I just ask
Sure.
a little question? Just real quick. On C here, when signs are installed back to back, only one face is considered as a sign area? Why? Why wouldn't you
Because you have
consider
a
both
maximum
sides?
angle as to that sign. So a back-to-back sign, if you were to set it up where that angle is very wide, then you can see it from more than one direction. If you can only see it from one direction, it counts as square
Single
footage,
sign.
because you either see it coming from one side or you see it coming from another, but you don't see it directly facing the sign, and that's why.
If you,
Does that mean both sides have to
If you have a
comply with all the rest of the codes? 'Cause you
correct,
don't-
but the size, when you're calculating the sign area, you would calculate one size. You wouldn't double it because there is
Okay, because that's what I was thinking, it would,
correct. And that goes
together,
back-
it would be doubled?
If you were to look at these signs up here, it would mean that you would calculate the area of one of those sides, even though on both of those signs, you have copy on both sides.
Yeah,
and what we, the
okay.
reason for the change of definition is if somebody was to take a sign and say they want to make a V out of it to get an angle,
Yeah.
we want to allow them to do that, but if all of a sudden they want to stretch it out so it's like this, no, then that's the whole copy area. So by doing that, it's just the same as a sign being flat, allowing them
Okay.
some flexibility in design.
But still, both sides have to comply.
Correct.
All right, gotcha.
But there is a limit as to how
There is,
big
there is a
they-
limit of how much they can open.
So I think it's 30 degrees.
Right.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
The next thing that we talk about is, since we're talking about sign height, the question always rises, where do you measure the height from? And we have a diagram basically that shows you measure it from the edge of the adjacent road. Now, one of the comments that we got from the McDonald's people, and I think it's a valid comment, was we think it should be measured from the center line of the road. And it's a valid comment on 41 on Bonita Beach Road, because on Bonita Beach Road, it makes about an 8 inches height difference when you figure the slope. On 41, it makes about a 10 to 11 inch height difference. My recommendation would be, if we're going to measure from the center line of the road, to just increase the height of the sign 1 foot, but measure from the same location, because this location is something where the inspector who's checking it can measure from without getting out in the middle of 41 or Beach Road and getting run over. So as a safety factor, if we're going to consider that modification, I would say increase the height of the sign 1 foot rather than the location, just because the practicality aspect of it. But their point's well taken about, the cars out here, being able to see it from the cars over there. I think that's a valid comment that they made.
Floor elevation is determined by the center crown of the road.
That's going to beg the question for, if you add a foot, then they're going to want another foot.
Well, and that's the reason we did it the way it is. And my only comment is, I'd rather to keep it at 8 foot. And if you want to measure from the center line of the road, that's fine. But from a practical standpoint, I want to let you know what the net effect would be.
What's the 8 foot measured from again?
Currently, we measured from the existing edge of pavement.
Is that the curb?
The flag of the gutter, if there's a
That-
gutter.
Correct.
Right, the curb. If there's curb, if it's just pavement, the edge of pavement. And the reason we chose that is because, especially on 41, if you don't do that, a lot of those properties are already in a hole, and we're not trying to hide the sign. A perfect example is when we did our research, the Chamber of Commerce sign, it was brought to our attention that's a 12-foot sign. They said, well, what's wrong with that sign? I said, it is a 12-foot sign the way that it was built, but under the new regulations, it's only about an 8.5-foot sign, because from the edge of the road, that's all the higher it is, because it sets down in in quite an elevation change.
Right.
So that was one of their comments, if you wish to consider where it's measured from. But their request was to be measured from the center line of the road versus the edge of the road. And the net effect is about 1 foot. Okay? If we continue on, page 27, there's no changes. Actually, there's a strike through. Something's eliminated on page 28. We have some, again, technical things about how you anchor canopies and so forth to the building, and so forth. As we get down to 673.
Could I just,
Sure.
there are a few changes in this ordinance that were changes that were in in the sign code, but for some reason, when it was codified, they were omitted.
Right.
So some things that you see underlined are reestablishments.
Okay.
If we get to the bottom of page 28, for monument signs, number B, we've added that street numbers need to be put. So that people looking for a street address, they already know they're on Bonita Beach Road, they already know they're on US 41, but the street numbers will be part of the sign also.
So that's going to be required?
That's going to be required.
That's good.
Also,
I
the sign
like
permit
that.
number is gonna be required, and it's gotta be readable from the street. And so my question is, will that identification permit number be in 6-inch letters or 3-inch letters? It doesn't say, it just says it's gonna be readable from the street, which I think is ridiculous.
So do I.
Because the little stickers all come off. I think when you pay to get a sign permit, they ought to give you one in stainless steel that you rivet on, and it's there forever. But the little tape thing that the county gives you, in a couple of years it comes off, so.
Mr. Sims, I could agree with removing that section if you would like.
But
But it must be affixed, but I understand. There are situations, if the sign is there for 20 years, that sticker is not going to last for 20 years, and you're definitely not going to be able to read it from the road. So if we're looking
Yeah.
at some changes for that, I
Yeah.
think that is something where we can agree.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of a valid point. That's the current language. But you can't read any of those in the streets. You got to get out of the truck and go out there and walk, look at it, and that should be fine.
Okay, let's move on.
Why, with all our vast record-keeping procedures we have, why do we even have to have the thing on the sign?
Because it makes it simple for enforcement in the field. While it's always easy if I'm in my office to type in an address or a project and find out what's been permitted, if I'm a code enforcement officer looking at certain items or issues, potential issues on a site, it's much easier for me to see the sticker and not have to go in and search for the permit. Because it might have been issued by our department, might have been issued by Lee County, might never have been issued.
the painter paints over them anyhow in a couple
Yeah.
of first time.
John, you're making a point for
Well,
getting
let's go
computers
back
for
to
all the
the-
code enforcement people.
Let's go back to the street numbers, the address.
Okay?
Because I think that's crucial. And we always make the joke about the people driving 5 miles down Beach Road trying to find something. But I think the way we're, I don't know whether it's an enforcement thing or whether it's just people don't know about it, but there needs to be, every building needs to have an address on it. And it's nice to say that it's the public's building, but, we need to know.
It's currently in the regulations, and this is kind of bumping up that standard.
Right. This needs to be clear enough that the signage, if they don't have signage or numbers on the building that's readable from the street, then it's got to be on the signage out in front that is readable from the street.
And our approach right now is it needs to be on the sign whether they have it on the building or not.
You want it
Because-
on the sign, whether it's on the building or not.
Right,
okay?
because, I mean, with landscaping, everything else, you see,
All right.
you see the sign, you don't necessarily see the building, and plus the building may be, 300 feet further back.
And this just goes to a construction situation where if you're building a new sign, then you're putting the numbers in the sign. If you're building a new building or making modifications to the building, then you put it on the building as well. So,
Yeah.
God willing, you get it in both within a short
Yeah,
period
I
of time.
think being on the monument sign out there contributes to, you find the plaza you're supposed to be in because the address matches it also, and then you go and find the particular retail place you want to go.
The next portion, you're going to see several changes, and it's the same change, starting in page 29, and where we've changed from 10 feet to 6 feet. And what we've done is on temporary signs, limit of 6 feet in height instead of 10. But more importantly, what we've done throughout here is that when you start to have a sign that's over 6 feet, a temporary sign that have an engineer look at to make sure it's not going to fall down, blow away, and become a hazard. That was not previously in the code. So that's the majority of those changes. It's not until we get to page 33, and we talked about this briefly earlier, and that is, this is the temporary and occasion signs. And we now have regulations in here for banners and blade signs and feather signs, and we've already talked about adding blade and feather sign definitions. You you have had a lot of people who've been using those, and they're just sticking them out there with no permits. And we needed to correct that, and we've done that here. And basically, blade signs are limited to 4, no closer than 25 feet. They got to be at least a certain distance back from the intersection. And they're limited as a special occasion sign, which basically you get 2 periods a year for 2 weeks that you can have those special occasion signs. And you have the option, if you want the banner, you can't have the blade or feathers. If you want the blade or feathers, you don't get the banner.
Feather sign being the one that waves and the,
Yeah, some people are calling blades and feathers the same thing.
yeah.
Yeah. As we go over onto page 34, it's all changes. We've, no longer using the word ground-mounted signs, and we've changed it to monument signs. And as you get onto page 35, there's been some clarity added as to where signs are allowed as you go into a residential development, when they're allowed within the right of, the median strip, when they're allowed on the walls. I'm going to say that is almost entirely clarity, so that you don't have the questions and the issues. At the bottom of page 35, we have added a section on flags and flagpoles. Mostly that you need to get a permit if it's over a certain size. And previously, if you go get a 15-foot flagpole and put it in your front yard that you got at Sam's or Costco or something, that's fine. But if you want to start going much above that, it needs to be engineered properly. Make sure it's not going to come crashing down in a storm and so forth. Going through from there, we get into the permanent signs in commercial industrial districts. You'll see a lot of strike-throughs, and that's where we've eliminated and simplified the regulation. Previously, sign area was determined on frontage, and if it's side street, if it's a secondary side street, if a double frontage street, and that was confusing. And since we're going to a placemaking sign, it made more sense to come up with a standard that you can adhere to. There are times that you may be allowed more than one monument sign, and we spell them out, I think, fairly clearly here. We talk about the size of the copy area on your monument sign is 75%. We do allow, you can increase the size of the sign in height and width by 10% if you're willing to put in additional architectural features. So we do give that opportunity that you can have a little bit bigger sign if you do something innovative, creative, and attractive. Again, as we go through on page 37, that's almost just all strike-throughs. Most of that was, we had the standard that says if you had a commercial building and you had less than 5 occupants, we give you this kind of sign. If you had more than 5 occupants, we give you this kind of sign. And we said, that may have made a lot of sense in 1980. Right now, if we're doing placemaking, it doesn't make any sense to do that. So let's clean that up and get rid of all these different versions and stick with one. We talk about, as we go through there, we've already talked about 1 foot setback from the right-of-way versus a 15-foot setback. One of the changes, we do talk about the primary colors, which we've already talked about. We do talk about the logos being allowed, and we chose the language that logos need to be federally or state registered trademarks. That's not real expensive to do, but we felt that it was important, because if not, everybody's name would be their logo or whatever. On the other hand, if somebody goes through the effort to do branding, trademark their name, they ought to have some respect for that. In that vein, 20% of the monument sign can have whatever the color's logo is. They can have a logo. If they go more than 20%, then they fall within the restricted colors. Again, a bunch of strike-throughs. One difference is at the bottom of the page, on page 38, we talk about out parcels. One of the things to figure out how to handle here properly, when you want a placemaking sign, and you have, we'll go back to the Prado Shopping Center. The Prado Shopping Center, they come in, they have their sign, it's great, we know where it is, we get in. What about the out parcels that have frontage on 41? They've paid dearly to have that frontage. Should they be allowed to sign? And after a lot of consideration and discussion with different people on that and looking at some other sign codes, we decided, you know what makes sense is that sign, they should be able to have a sign, but we would make it a subordinate sign. In other words, it needs to be a little smaller compared to the major sign, so that people know the major sign is where you turn in at. The other sign is because the bank building, Fifth Third has a bank in there. You've really got to go through there, but they can have the sign out there. It seemed to make sense. And so we've limited the height of those signs and the size of those signs, so they're slightly smaller, so they become a subordinate sign to a parent sign of the shopping center. If we continue on to page 39, is when we get into the wall signs. The current code allows a 10% of the face area for a wall sign. We've increased that to 15%, and that's actually common with Naples now. They allow 15%. And part of this, though, gets into also the sign ban and so forth.
And also what we added was for situations like this, you'll notice there's a border around the sign, so it looks like it's placed right. Whereas our code right now is very silent on that, because you'll end up with signs such as that. So there's language in there about having a border. It also needs to be consistent with the unified sign plan, so architecturally, I mean, yes, we're allowing you to go up to 15%, but we want to make sure that the sign will still match in mass and scale of the building. So there is still a caveat that you may not still be able to get your 15%. It depends on the facade of the building and how it's placed.
I think in most instances, if they plan properly, they'll get it. I mean, it would be silly to put something in there that you couldn't achieve.
Right.
But on the other hand, you will have on a corner building where they may not get the full 15% of both sides because of the architecture features, the sign band location, and so forth. On the other hand, they actually have a lot more wall frontage. But overall, I think they're going to be able to do it. There is going to be some issues with people being able to get it on some older buildings where the roof is real low, because we don't allow roof signs. But we've actually talked to several people and say there's ways that they can work through that. But those would be the rare occasion, and most of those are, you know, in the downtown area, which actually has a different set of rules anyway.
Jay, in this, is there any reference to the architecture and the signs? In other words, compatibility between size of the sign, the copy, and the sign band it finds itself on, such as this example on the left is a really good example of a very nice-looking sign that's appropriate for the architecture, where the one on the bottom is not.
Right. That is all going to be addressed in a unified sign plan, and if a center or a building that has multiple signs does not have a unified sign plan, they will need to apply for one that would be reviewed by the city's architect if they don't have one. And in that instance, the city architect would go ahead and look at the scale and size and the placement of those sign bands.
Okay.
And with our monument signs, they're supposed to be designed consistent, compatible with the building. What I also want to touch on, a new section in here, is that before our sign code never addressed multiple story buildings that had 3 or more floors. It was just the 10% of the wall sign, and you can get your unified sign plan. So here we went ahead and proposed language so we could address situations like that. We did have some feedback at the forum with the chamber, And I will be making a change to F4 about the signs being the same color. I mean, that would be addressed at a unified sign plan level, so we don't need to regulate that at this detail.
Okay, thanks.
Sam, this, I can't read that, but I can read that, USA Park, but I can't read the legal one.
Yeah, the reason why is because of the shadow, so I apologize. It was the way the sun hit.
Yeah.
So if I owned that building, I certainly wouldn't want to sign that.
Let's just call this an unfortunate use of examples.
That's what I say, you've got them switched around. You ought to have the one that you can read up there.
It's
this.
my fault because I knew that was a good sign that was an example of what we were looking to do. When you're actually there, you actually look at the sign. It does not look as vague as a shadow shows it in the picture.
Talking about, and this happened out at the forum, we keep talking about signs inside a development on buildings. And I can understand because you're going 5 miles an hour inside the shopping center. But going down Beach Road at 45 miles an hour is a different story, and we don't want to lose sight of that.
The beach road standards are pretty much what we're looking to apply citywide. So you're not going to see much of a difference in what can be done on Bonita Beach Road to a certain. I mean, there's some things that are modified. The bigger difference is going to be on the other commercial corridors within the city. US 41, a certain extent Imperial, even though that's mainly residential, Terry to a certain degree. But Bonita Beach Road will probably be the least impacted in terms of a shift in policy, simply because a lot of the regulations that we're looking to apply already exist there or exist to a certain degree.
All right. But it is a 45 mile and 41 is 45 to 50 mile an hour. So
You have to that has been one of my concerns
those are
in the beginning.
issues that are important to people who are in business on that.
That's exactly right, because you have a more narrow right-of-way width on Bonita Beach Road. You generally tend to have smaller parcels. The speed limit is lower. US 41 either has a 45 or a 55 mile an hour speed limit. Bonita Beach Road does not have a 55 mile an hour speed limit. The right-of-way on US 41 is wider. The developments tend to be larger because the parcels are larger. So there are some fundamental differences between those two roads, and I think we've taken some efforts to address that in terms of size and location. But Bonita Beach Road in and of itself, what you see out there and what's permittable today is relatively similar to what we're proposing into the
Okay.
future.
Okay, Jay.
Okay. Jackie talked about the multiple-story buildings and having those regulations in here now. If we continue on, we have clarified some language for marquee signs. They're not what some people would think, but I think that's where we get into that special exception.
Yeah, I think
issue.
as I read it, it looks like there's been a pretty good change here. However, for those more creative signs that need to exceed the horizontal distance here on the edges, is there a way that can be looked at and judged by staff?
I think that kind of goes back under that special exception process that we were looking at previously. Now, keep in mind that planned developments can also have their deviations applied at the time of zoning. So how these standards are applied will vary depending upon the type of zoning the property currently has, type of zoning that they're desiring, and the type of development that's there today. So for an existing building, you look at the special exception. If you're building a brand new building and it's going to go through as a planned development, I would recommend a deviation application at the time of submittal so that those sign questions are addressed by the time you're done with zoning.
Yeah, I know experience I've had is that sometimes the sign people are not brought in till much later, and you can't address it at that time. However, I'm more speaking of architecturally designed marquees that happen from the architect's desk.
And I think some of the requirements that you're seeing in here that we're proposing do ask for some of those sign locations and types at the time of architectural review so that you don't have that inconsistency where the architect designs the building and then after everything's done and approved, the sign company comes in and tries to stick a sign on it somewhere.
Yeah, because I think the architect plays a role in what these marquees are being what they look like architecturally. So I think it's incumbent on the architect to probably say, look, we have something that's going to come up. You guys take a look at this and see what you think. So there's a process there.
Yes, sir.
Yes. If we go to the bottom of page 41, we talk about flags again. This is in commercial areas. We didn't have regulations on some of this, but as we looked at that, we didn't want to get into the trying to regulate flags or that issue so much, but we had some concerns, and if you look at that, in other communities you see flags, big flags flying. People use it as a sign, and what we said is you can't do that and have that flapping out over 41. You can't have a big flag and have it flapping out over Beach Road. That if you're going to do that, there's a limit on the height that the flagpole can be, and that the flag, has to stay within your property. Fairly simple regulations. You can't fly it over your neighbor's property, so forth. On E, though, one of the things that we've added is allowing sandwich board signs. One of the questions that businesses are often asking us, because there was a prohibition originally against them, why can't I have my daily specials out there? If I'm offering, 2-for-1 ice cream cones, why can't I have my sign that says that? If I'm offering, a roast beef sandwich special for lunch, why can't I do that? And they ought to be able to do that within certain parameters and guidelines. And so what we have done here is outline those parameters and guidelines by which they could have that type of sign to help their business. We felt it appropriate. Basically, they need to make sure that they're not blocking the sidewalk, that they're not creating a problem for ADA compliance, that the signs come in at night, that they don't just leave them out there. And so there's a set of standards by which they must adhere to them, but this is a change that they would be allowed to have that type of sign where currently that's prohibited.
So what you're stopping here is people running up and down sidewalk, the city sidewalk, because you're bringing them within 10 feet of the front door, right?
Yeah, but within the sidewalk in front of a shopping center, Publix has a rather wide sidewalk, but some of the shopping centers, if we go across the street, Sunshine Plaza, part of that sidewalk may be 12 feet wide, some of it may be 5 feet wide. Well, in the 5-foot wide portion, that wouldn't be appropriate. There's no way to put a sign there. But if you're in an area where it's 12 feet or 14 foot wide, and you have a restaurant in there, what's wrong with people being to drive by in their car and see you have your specials advertised on a sandwich sign on a daily basis? And we felt that it's one of those things that are appropriately located. It's reasonable and it's good for business. And so we've added that to the code.
You've got a letter wrong there. You've got 2 E's on that page. Change the first one to C. Or something.
Yes. Thank you.
What's the absolute limit on sidewalk? What's the minimum sidewalk width you have to have before you can put one of those signs up out on the sidewalk?
Well, the sign can't be more than 30 inches wide or 42 inches high,
Right,
okay?
but width is sidewalk.
The width of the sidewalk, what we've done is we've just listed it has to be ADA compliant, and typically that's 60 inches.
And this doesn't include the signs that people wear.
Well, those were banned.
Those were banned, yeah.
Those were banned.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Those are fun to watch, and there used to be one out on Old 41.
And the reason they're banned is they were fun to watch, and then also
Right.
people are rear-ending each other because they're watching the guy twirling the sign around versus,
So somebody that's looking like the Statue of Liberty and waving to everybody has been banned.
Well,
Or because it is not a sign?
if they're carrying a sign, you can regulate the sign. If I just decide to go stand out in front of community development and say permits are on sale today, just waving to everybody, wearing a shirt that says community development, no one can stop me. But if I carry a sign that says community development, then you can regulate that.
Okay. Interesting.
One of the other comments that McDonald's people had was on the menu board signs. We don't see it being a problem. They were concerned. We've already permitted a dual drive-through at the McDonald's out by 75. They were concerned about the language. We're not, because we've already addressed it, but we will just let everybody know that we will talk with them about that and explain that to them. We don't see their concerns because we've already permitted it. But just, they did write that, and I felt I should bring that out. There's been a minor change or a major change to the interstate highway exchange area signs. Currently, the way that it is written, the higher the sign you get, the bigger the sign you get. And we sort of felt that was sort of counterintuitive of what we're trying to accomplish for the city. And so we reverse those numbers. The higher the sign, it gets a little bit smaller. The lower the sign, it's a little bit bigger. In that change. And then in the next, on page 43,
Does the logo and everything apply on those out on the highway?
It's a different, I know what you're saying.
we didn't address color on those signs, no.
I don't think we didn't tie that into,
We didn't tie
Because I
those
was
in.
thinking one of those highway signs is a McDonald's.
Right.
It's on a
Yeah,
60-foot
we didn't
pole.
tie that
That's
into
fine.
those.
Pardon?
We didn't put the color restrictions
Okay.
on those. We didn't make a change to that. As you get to page 43, 44, 45, all that's been eliminated. Again, now that we've changed the direction of signs, there's just no need for all that language to be in there. And then, there's no changes, but just that you are aware, the next section is how signs are on Old 41. And we're not making any changes to that, except for to clarify the shopping centers versus the five, under five, over five complexes. And then I think the only other change we have in it is the effective date, because the existing ordinance was written and went into effect in 2009. Obviously, this is going to go into effect after that. So any questions?
Any questions, board?
Yeah, I have
Looking-
just a couple.
Okay.
I don't want to prolong it, because we're
It's
now on
lunchtime.
overtime. What's called unpaid overtime.
You get angry when you get hungry.
Well, no, one of them was just a suggestion, and that on the monument signs being right at the edge of the right-of-way,
Uh-huh.
is there any given that where, like, if they move it back 3 or 4 feet, which would allow a little more, a little low landscaping in front of it, which I think would be attractive?
well, I'm not sure that's really what we're looking for. The whole purpose of bringing it up to the right-of-way is so that you increase that visibility. And I understand what you're saying, landscaping is generally better than no landscaping. But in this particular case, the landscaping you're wanting to install is gonna work against the intent of providing increased visibility. You want that view corridor for the sign that draws your eye towards it, not the landscaping that kind of distracts you from it.
Well, I think low landscaping, and then the other landscaping that kind of dies out around both sides of it, actually.
We do require, as part of the landscaping, not in the sign code, some foundation plantings
Yeah,
at the sign. Yeah, that's already in the landscape code.
is there any place where the right-of-ways are literally at the back of the sidewalk, or are they all 4 or 5 feet
The
behind?
only one that the only example I can use right now, and I hate to use an example because people are gonna love it or hate it, is the new sign at Racetrack that has their prices on it. That is right at the right-of-way line. And you'll see the foundation landscaping and such around that.
All right.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I've always got questions. I'm new at this, so I'm learning all along. Back in the definitions, you have something called snipe signs. Now, I'm assuming something like lost cat that gets tacked up on a phone pole would be a snipe sign?
Yes, but it's really more when
Is
you
that-
see someone that puts directions to a garage sale, like those little stick in the real estate signs or something that you just kind of step in,
Okay.
step on. So
Are they illegal? I don't remember where that was addressed. So you can't put a garage sale sign up in
You
your,
can ask for
On the-
a permit for that, but if you just go out and at the corner of Beach Road and 41 start putting directions to your house for your garage sale, know that it's not permitted.
okay, like I live in Cedar Creek, like out in front of my community, I guess on our property or where the public property is, probably our property, could I put a sign there, says garage sale, would that be legal?
Not a snipe sign. Those are the ones that we're discouraging.
Your
So
Okay, I'm
covenants-
just
Your
curious.
covenants and your regulations within the subdivision probably wouldn't allow it.
the
We
only
do a
time-
garage sale every year, and I don't know what they put out there,
The
so
only
I'm just
time I've
curious.
ever seen any type of sign like that permitted is when it's associated with a special event, and there's concerns that the general public will not know how to get to the parking area. And as part of the special permit, they will permit specific locations for a specific number of signs. That's the only time I've
Okay.
ever seen.
So I can, again, tack up my lost cat sign temporarily on a phone pole or something?
I'm not,
Well, didn't say they were illegal.
Snipe, well, that is
That's
a
not a snipe
sign.
sign.
It is, and it's in the prohibited section.
It's in the
I-
prohibited.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's a no-no.
okay. I mean, I'm just curious. I don't have a lost cat, but I'm
We're
just
happy to
curious.
hear that.
And
It's
me
still
too.
not, you're still not supposed, and quite frankly, you're not supposed to, on trees, on poles, I mean, that's litter.
Well, sure, it is. I agree. It's tacky, but you know, if you're a dog or cat owner and you're desperate, you know, so
That's could be even under the litter ordinance. We have,
I hear you. I hear you. I think I had one more question. Under here on billboards on location, even though it wasn't a changed area, it says billboards are okay if the area is industrial or interchange. Now, something like where they were going to put the homeless shelter on Old 41 was considered, I think it was still industrial, commercial.
we have industrial on Old.
Could somebody put up a big billboard there?
There are billboards in 041.
Right, and we actually have a pending.
Up at the north end, but
claim.
not, yeah.
No, on the
That's actually on
north and
Burnwood.
south, on the Burnwood parcel, we have a claim.
Billboards?
We have a Bert Harris claim pending currently with the gentleman behind us.
Ah, okay. All right. So they could put them up there.
Oh, that's a matter of question that we're not going to
Bert
answer
Harris,
today here,
okay.
but yes.
I hear
But
you.
there are signs that depends on how you define it and the 2009 changes.
Okay. That's, that particular stretch is turning out to be more residential than anything else. That particular stretch.
Okay.
It still has its zoning, but
Right, but it still has industrial park there.
Ed, aren't you glad?
Oh, I don't mind. You have one more question, Rick?
Yeah, actually, a statement and then a question.
That was heavy industrial.
I for one think that we have the right to make, something non-conforming. And if something doesn't say you can't do something, it's usually presumed legally you can do something. Number one. Number two is, and I only, in fact, if it's going to get into a big discussion, just whisper to me, it's like, well, what is an illegal non-conform? I think I know, but then I really don't think I know, because if it was something that was put up before he had a sign ordinance, then
it's
it
something
would-
that
it-
was put up.
it become a legal non-conforming sign.
That's why I thought we needed to define it.
Sign installed inconsistent with the regulations, and inconsistent generally means unpermitted.
Yeah,
And so at no point in time was that sign ever legal.
but a permit, anything that's, like if you build a building without a permit or you
Mhm.
modify it, after some number of years, the building code presumes that it met code even though it didn't have a permit and it doesn't meet code. So, yes, it does.
We need to
Question
define that better, I think. You know, even if it just say that
I don't.
illegal non-conforming is not a real term,
We're gonna
it would
get-
be an illegal sign
We're going
or
to get to
something.
that when we take a look at this for voting. Right now, I think I'd like to call for the audience. Any comments from the audience?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Scott Hertz. I'm an attorney. I'm here representing Carter Pritchett with some comments about the ordinance, and I'll be brief considering the length of the meeting you've gone through, and you have touched on some of the issues, and fortunately or unfortunately, the result of those changes, as Mr. Sims has pointed out, really affects a lot of signs throughout the entire ordinance. We had some of the same concerns in the ordinance in the definition of non-conforming signs. Ms. Vance did relay them to you, and I believe she suggested some language that I guess that perhaps was an inadvertent scrivener's error in a previous version of the ordinance that declared every single sign in Bonita Springs to be a legal non-conforming sign, which certainly shouldn't be the intent, because that means even signs that completely complied with the ordinance at the time it was passed were still deemed non-conforming, which certainly doesn't match the way those terms are normally used, and it has some other implications throughout the rest of the ordinance. As well as Mr. Sims raised an issue that I think that needs to be addressed in the terms of the expiration of the sign permit, because the word permitted sign and sign permits has multiple meanings throughout the document. And I think a distinguishment needs to be made between the construction permit and the then lawful permitted sign. I believe one of the members made a suggestion about adding the words, if a final inspection has not been obtained, into that sentence. So something to the effect of, if a final inspection has not been obtained, a signed permit shall expire and become null and void 6 months from the date of issuance. That would clear that up. I think the difference when you raised houses and some other things is it's not that you have a permitted house or a permitted building once it's constructed. It's you have a house or a building that's received either a certificate of occupancy or certificate of use or both. And the same thing happens for conforming or non-conforming uses for a business. If you have a certificate of use, you can become non-conforming, but as they said, unless you make certain changes, you can't be driven out. But here where the words permitted sign are used throughout the ordinance, and there's a part of the ordinance that says your permit becomes null and void, it becomes confusing as to whether you have a legitimately permitted sign or not after 6 months. And I don't think that's the intent, and I think that should be clarified. Another issue that we noticed is the definition of pole signs and pylon signs is somewhat perhaps conflicting with where the definition of billboards and the signs are there. And we think it should be clarified that a sign that falls under the definition of billboard is not a pylon or pole sign, because then pylon and pole signs are prohibited, but billboards are permitted. And if you look at the construction of the permitted billboards, there's some overlap and confusion there, and we think those things need to be clarified. With that said, without going point by point through the ordinance as you've just kind of done, until we understand how the language is going to be changed to define what is and is not non-conforming, it's difficult to determine how all of these things apply to the areas we have concern about. Because right now, if everything is truly non-conforming, there's some major concerns with the ordinance, as well as its constitutionality. You would actually have, in our opinion, affecting the content of the signs. There could be a favoring actually of non-commercial or commercial speech over one or the other, and those things are prohibited both by the Florida and United States Constitution. I don't think that's the intent here, and there's been some comments saying that's not the intent, but we sort of, I guess to use it in a legal way, we'd want to reserve the right to comment, and I guess we'll try to plan both to be at the public hearing in front of your council as well as back on your October 9th once you announce the time of that, to get a chance to look at these changes, because it's significant. You're not talking about a minor change when you're trying to determine whether or not a sign is conforming or non-conforming and what the rights are to change the copy on that sign. So that said, we are planning to meet with Vance, and I assume whatever other members of your city staff are appropriate to discuss these changes, and we'll be happy to come back to your October 9th and to the council meetings to share that. If you have any questions for us, we're happy to discuss that with you. But based on those overarching natures, we didn't think it made sense to spend a lot more of your time after you spent this many hours going through it, kind of going point by point when we don't know if they will or will not have legal operative effect upon the areas of concern. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Your name again?
Scott Hertz.
Scott Hertz, okay. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon. I'm Charles Cockrell. I work for Carter Pritchett Advertising, and I was involved in the revision to the sign ordinance back in 2009. One of the things that was discussed and was deemed to be acceptable by City Council at that time was to designate the billboards that were existing in 2009 as legal conforming signs, and just want to go on record that we'd obviously like to maintain that status. As Mr. Hertz mentioned, that we've had some conversation this morning with Ms. Vance, that it appears that that language will not be stricken, and obviously I would be in support of that. You know, obviously nothing has really changed as far as the nature of those billboards that are in existence in 2009 as compared to today, and there were a lot of very, even though I may say points that I added which were deemed to be valid by the city council as to why they should stay conforming. So look forward to working with the staff to you know, perhaps clarify that language.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank
We
you.
have your name and so forth?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Audrey, we're not taking a final vote on this, are we? But John indicated we are.
We need to make significant changes or substantial changes that at this time I don't think a vote would make sense. And quite frankly, I still want to respond back to Mr. Sims on his strict reading as to comprehensive planning. And I'd like to have a little bit of time so I can respond to his comments there, because I don't want him to vote no, because if he's voting no for everything for the rest of his, you know, being an LPA member, I don't know if that's productive.
We can only approve this in its totality. You can't approve portions.
I don't know. Well, I guess you could do it if you wanted to. I'm not gonna.
What's the point? It just gets it more confused.
Right.
It's going to be changed.
Okay,
I wouldn't
Let's work
recommend
on
doing
this,
it.
and we'll meet back October 9th on the subject.
okay. Any
8
other
o'clock?
comments from the board?
Oh, I was just saying 8 o'clock?
8:30? It's
8:30? I meant 8:30, I'm sorry.
Yeah, 8:30.
Does that work?
Looking at the minutes from the previous meeting, do we have any comments on that? Do we have a motion?
I wasn't here.
Make motion. Second? To approve?
Aye.
A second to approve the minutes? So approved. There is no further business here except to say that the next meeting is October 9th at 8:30 in this room. And with that, meeting is adjourned.